Actually, on the compound setup, when we ran that on the dyno, I think Shane got it up to 135 pounds of boost because that's what as high as the sensor would read. When we pulled that motor out, we did see a lot of distortion in the combustion chamber of the head. He's wanting to push 200 pounds of boost to it. Like I said, I think the head casting is probably going to get the brunt of it.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Mark from Mazworx in the United States. Mazworx is a pretty well-known name in the import scene, particularly if you are interested in Nissans, and Nissan SR20 would probably be their main claim to fame. We're actually running a number of the Mazworx products on the SR20 VE turbo engine that's powering our Toyota 86 endurance car, and I've actually used this episode as a bit of a selfish learning curve because I've been trying to extract all of the little tips and secrets out of Mark that I can then apply to our own SR20 builds in the future. But of course, any of you listening to this who are SR20 fans are going to benefit from this conversation as well. This goes pretty deep, and we even touch on the SR20 billet block build, how this came about. Currently, this engine's making around about 2,000 horsepower, and back in 2019 when we first chatted to Mark in person about this at the PRI show, they did hold the world record for the fastest and quickest four-cylinder drag car. Now, obviously, these records are continually evolving. They're somewhere around about number 7 on the top 10 list at the moment, but don't worry, they're coming back, and believe it or not, their aim is for 3,000 horsepower out of a four-cylinder engine. It sounds insane until you realize that Mark and Shane T have teamed up on this. Shane T, a previous guest if you haven't heard that name before. And Shane doesn't tend to throw numbers around willy-nilly. If he says something, generally he's going to come good on it. So definitely looking forward to learning more about that particular package. Before we get into our interview with Mark, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune engines, how to construct and design wiring harnesses. We also cover race car setup, race driver education, 3D modeling and CAD, just to name a few of our topics. All of these courses are delivered via high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This gives you the benefit of being able to learn from your own place and at your own pace. As a podcast listener, you can also use the coupon code podcast75, and that will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put that coupon code in the show notes, as well as a link to our courses page, which you can find at hpacademy.com/courses. All right, let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Mark. Thanks for joining us. And as usual, let's start by finding out a little bit about your background, specifically how you developed an interest in cars and the automotive industry.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for inviting me on. I mean, probably just like any other young man that got into cars, it probably started back in high school, love of cars, back in, it was probably early 90s. The muscle cars in the U.S., the Chevelles, the Novas, always had an interest in those. When we were going through high school, my brother ended up getting a Chevelle that I liked so much and had the 396 in it. It was so cool to work on. Took a few mechanics classes in our high school. We had a motorcycle mechanics class that I took for 2 years and really enjoyed it. From there, I ended up joining the Marines and my senior year of high school, and they asked me what job I wanted to do. And I don't know, I had no clue. And I just remember reading hot rod magazines about machinists, how they worked on engines. So I was like, I want to be a machinist. They're like, we got machinists in the military? I'm like, I don't know. So they looked it up and they said, sure enough, there's machinists in the military. So they signed me up, and my dad was a machinist too, and that's all I knew. Honestly, I had no idea what machinist did. I just knew the term, and that's what I signed up for.
Straight in the deep end then.
Yeah, I just jumped right in.
But I guess you managed to get your trade and build all of those skills essentially on the US sort of dime. Is that about how that worked out?
Well, yeah, I guess if you put it that way, it makes sense. Yeah, so when I left for the Marines, I went to machining school and finally understood what it took, and I enjoyed it.
This wouldn't have been specifically related to engine machining, but I guess you build up those skills of general machining, understanding how the equipment works. You can essentially use those machines then for any purpose.
Yeah, but more of an industrial machinist, working the knee mill, working lathes, basic, old school machining tools. Back then it was, we learned on the manual stuff. We had zero CNC stuff. You're talking, this is, mid 90s. So you basically learned the fundamentals, how to cut metal. And then, after I completed my school, they asked me where I wanted to go. We get to write a wish list. And there was basically three spots, we could get deployed to. It was either East Coast in the U.S. and Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We can go to Pendleton in California, or we can go to this place called Okinawa, Japan. And I was like, Okinawa, this is 1996. I'm like, I don't know where that's at. I was like, I want to go as far as I can go. So sure enough, they sent me out there, and I've never really been on an airplane before. I never really traveled much, so going to Japan was a whole new world for me.
Yeah, language barrier as well.
And it was interesting. I mean, it was like flying into a movie set. I couldn't believe my eyes. And then, I spent 3 years there and just really cut my teeth on Japanese cars. I transferred from being a domestic guy into a Japanese car guy. And I loved every minute of it being over there. The Japanese people are very friendly. They'll teach you anything. They'll speak to you. I just learned everything. And this is the, mid to late 90s. So all the cars were hot, in those days. The Skylines, the Silvias.
It's kind of the peak of peak of that JDM culture and the cars that were coming out around that time. I was wondering where the disconnect was between, obviously, you're known for your work with JDM engines, specifically mostly Nissan. So the US domestic thing, I was kind of wondering where that disconnect came in. At this point, when you're sort of comparing what was available in that mid-90s era from Japan versus what was coming out at the time in the US domestics, the muscle cars, etc., any sort of cliff notes on the differences there?
Oh, wow. It was night and day. I mean, I was coming from working on a Chevelle with a carburetor, going and then working on cars with fuel injection and turbochargers, little 2-liter motors. I'm like, I had a buddy of mine pick me up in his car when I first got there, and it was a Nissan Silvia with a CA18, and he took off on it, and I'm like, wow, I'm like, what's in this thing? This can't be a 4-cylinder. I'm like, no way. And sure enough, I mean, I remember that car ride till today, and that changed my whole aspect on engines and cars. And
yeah, and the old saying, there's no replacement for displacement, I think hasn't maybe aged that well. And with modern turbos in particular, it is quite impressive how well these small capacity engines can perform. All right, so you're in Japan. What's the next step for you in terms of the life journey?
Well, I did my 3 years in Japan, and I was coming on my contract, 4-year contract with the military. I love Japan so much. I was begging to stay. They're like, you've been here 3 years. You can't. You got to go back. You got to re-enlist. I had a bunch of choices I can go with. And I ended up deciding to get out of the military, come back home. Since I was in Japan long enough, I was allowed to bring my car back and some goodies. So I packed up as much as I could. I had a 1988, Nissan Silvia C18 turbocharged. It started off being a Q's. I converted to a K's and went through that whole journey. Ended up bringing the car back. This was probably 1999, and enjoyed it here in the U.S. and got in the car scene over here. When I came back, it was a completely different scene than I was used to in Japan, because I pretty much, quote unquote, matured into the car scene in Japan. So you go to the street races there, everyone's friendly, pop your hoods, you talk, you race, you come back, you talk some more, and it was quite chill. And the Japanese people were very friendly about it. I go to my first street race in the U.S., and it was all in the backwoods. It was all hidden. Everyone's talking smack and fights happening, and I just honestly, it was probably
not quite as friendly.
It was like a culture shock of my own culture, but I got used to it. And then from there, I ended up going to college. Took advantage of the GI Bill, was working on my degree in mechanical engineering, ended up tying up with the guys over at Titan Motorsports when they were very small. I think it was like just 3 of them there, and ended up starting working for them. They specialize in Supras, and back then it was probably 2000, 2001, I think. I started working with them, and I probably worked there, I think, till about 2003. I know Nero had his personal car in the back, and he always dreamed about going racing it, and we bugged him like, dude, let's build it. Let's go racing. And he gave us green light. We started building it. And that's when we brought it out to the NHRA Sport Compact series.
So this is the Copper Supra that Titan are so well known for?
Yes.
It's broken a heap of records in import drag racing.
Yeah, it's been through a lot. I mean, it has a lot of history. Back then it was black. I think we just did a build. We didn't paint it or nothing. We just kept it crude. I think he was just testing the waters. We took it out, and we ended up starting winning events, and it was like, wow. So he really rolled into it, and we had a blast. I think that was the 2002 year. We ended up winning the series with it, and that's when I really got into more of a Toyota. So I kind of backed off on the Nissan stuff, because, right at that point, that was my main business, is working on Toyota Supra. So that's where all my focus was.
So at this point, working for Titan, what's your sort of role in terms of, are you engine building here, or what's it look like?
Well, we were young. We had a lot of energy, so I was pretty much doing a little bit of everything, fab work. I pretty much did most of the fab. We did some motor builds, but it was mostly motor builds for the race team. I don't think we did any motor builds for customers that I can recall. We had a machine shop doing most of the work for us. So I was just in charge of the whole race team, the fabrication department.
In terms of these skills that you're sort of building up, obviously we know you've got this background in machining. How have you sort of developed the other skills in terms of engine building? Obviously more of this comes later, but also you've just mentioned fabrication. Is this all sort of self-taught skills?
Pretty much. I mean, at that time, there wasn't anything out there really showing you the Japanese stuff. Stuff I just learned through the past, just self-taught. I'm making a lot of mistakes. Next time I won't do that.
Often expensive mistakes, unfortunately, too.
Yeah, the internet really wasn't big back then, so there's no real place you can turn to for advice. I mean, we had the engine machine shop that was doing most of our work was really just a V8 shop. So he was learning too. So it was more of just seeing what other people are doing, talking around, experimenting. There's really no vast place of information we can go to like there is nowadays to figure out what we need to do. So we definitely blew up a lot of motors. We broke a lot of stuff, and just trial and error really is what we got down to. 2003, I think we raced that Nopi series in 2003. We ended up changing the car. Well, the first year we ran it with the factory 6-speed. Then the second year we tried running it with the 6-speed, and then we had a competitor that was running automatic that was just killing us. So we had to change to an automatic, and we ran out that year. I think we ended up finishing second that year. In the following year, I ended up starting up Mazworx in 2004. 2004. We parted ways. I had an opportunity to start my own business.
Tell us about that transition, because this is something I'm always interested in with people who start a business, that leap of faith, sort of going from steady employment, getting your paycheck every week, and then the great unknown. So, how did that pan out for you?
Well, I mean, it was, at the time, it seemed like the smart thing to do, and that it would be so easy.
Famous last words.
And it would just happen. And a year later, struggling, it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be.
What were the hurdles you faced? What made it hard?
Probably because I'm very technical. I mean, I believe I'm more of a technical person than a social person. So I would say my sales skills, my marketing skills are very low. So when you're working in the back of somebody else's shop and you're getting, you see all this work coming in, you just think it magically comes in. It just comes in through the front door. And if you take that mentality and you start your business, and then you sit there and wait, and nothing magically comes through the door.
Nothing comes. Yeah. I've talked on this podcast a number of times in the past about the usual story with entrepreneurs in this industry is they start the business because they're good at a specific skill set and that's what they enjoy doing. And quickly you realize that actually when it comes to operating a functional and successful business, there's so many other moving parts that all need to come together. So how did you overcome that? Was it a case of doubling down and learning those skills, or employing people with the skills?
Well, initially I employed people to help me out. I also wanted to learn on my own because I figured in order to run a business, I should at least understand most of the aspects of running it, of doing each job. So we had a few sales guys come through, marketing guys that really helped out and showed me what needed to happen to bring the clientele in. And it was probably a good 10 years before we actually saw the light and it really started blossoming.
Was there a key element in that 10 years that sort of changed the fortunes of Mazworx and turned it into what it is today? Or is it just a case of gradual iterative change and more products, etc.?
Probably a little bit of both. The main thing was, I think the point that really changed it was not letting the customers dictate how you run your business. Set some boundaries, set some rules, and structure your business in a spot to where you can dictate how the work comes in, how the work flows. Basically, the services and the products that make you the margin are the ones you should concentrate on, not the stuff that kills you.
I think that's so hard to take that advice, though, particularly when you're just starting out. You're hungry to put food on the table, let's be honest. So anyone who comes through the door with a wad of cash, you're very, very keen to take that money and do whatever that job is. But as you sort of grow and your experience increases, and hopefully as you get busier as well, you start learning that less is more, and focusing on the jobs you turn away are probably more important than the jobs you take sometimes, I think anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, once the volume starts picking up, then you can kind of be a little more picky on what you bring in, and then you also start learning. Like when you see that wad of cash show up, you're like, that's a lot of money, but at the end, I'm probably going to end up losing. So you have to learn how, sometimes to say no. You don't have to do everything the customer asks. I mean, if the customer, and you got to come with the mentality of, if you've been in there long enough, you got to consider yourself a professional. And if they're coming to you, then that means they respect your work. And then you tell them, this is how it should be done, because this is how I can guarantee a quality product. I'll be happy delivering this to you, and instead of doing it your way, and I think both the customer and the business would, it would work out better that way.
Yeah, 100%. On that same note, I ran a tuning workshop, and we built engines as well. So obviously a little different to what you're doing, but I'm guessing you probably experienced the same situation, which is customers basically walking in the door saying, here, I'd like you to build my engine, and here's all of these parts that I have gathered at the cheapest possible basement bottom price from eBay or wherever it may be. And I mean, there's twofold with that as I see it. First of all, I mean, people think that building engines, you're sort of printing cash, but the reality is that the hard parts that go into the engine, the margins are usually relatively small, and often some of the customers basically get them at the same discount that the workshops get them at, so there's not a lot of money to be made there. So straight away, if you build the engine with all these parts the customer's providing, you kind of strip away your margin. The second, and probably the most important part though, is you've then got no control over those parts. They're whatever the customer's provided. Maybe it's a brand of piston or connecting rod that you don't personally like for whatever reason. And if there's a problem with that part, then it basically ends up reflecting on you. However, it's very difficult, or I found it very difficult to say, hey, look, I'm sorry, if you want the engine built, it's our parts, or go somewhere else. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean that's how we started when we started accumulating all the machinery. Obviously, we had to bring in work, so we were bringing in work like every other shop, doing job shop type work. Itemizing all our labor. If you wanted a board hone, it's this much. If you want a line hone, it's this much. Customers provide the parts, like you said. That's where all the liability's on you, no matter what parts he brings you. If you accept the work, you're married to it. But once we got going, we ended up getting all the machinery we needed to do all the work in house. We didn't have to rely on nobody else. We got a steady amount of work coming in. We had to bite the bullet and say, okay, this is how we got to start selling our products. We no longer sell the engine machining services like a classical machine shop. We want to provide finished product that's been proven, that we're comfortable with, that we know that's going to be solid. And, we provide all the parts. I mean, we have to. So it took probably about a year or two for that really to catch on, but it was something we had to do, because if not, we had engines coming in that the guys, another shop couldn't line bore it. So they just wanted us to line bore it. Then you break it down. It's like, we're not really making much money just doing a line bore. If something's wrong, it's been through 3 other shops, and they end up pointing a finger at the shop, last on the list.
Yep. Always the story.
So we have more control over the finished product if we can do everything, provide everything. And at the end of the day, the customer gets better results, and there's less hassle.
Do you think it's fair to say, though, there's sort of a crossover point at which you can start doing that? If you open a shop tomorrow, you've got no reputation, no one's heard about you, your products aren't proven, it's much more difficult, I think, you might disagree, to sort of start that shop and right from the get-go, like, hey, we don't deal with other people's products. You just hand over your money and you'll get our finished product. But once you've got some runs on the board, you've got some exposure, people understand the brand, and it's doing well, that's when you can sort of transition. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, yeah, especially starting a business with a lot of machinery involved, it's, you got to make the monthly payment on the machines, and you got to do whatever it takes. And unfortunately, that's where you got to start. And that's how we started. We started doing all the piecework and doing whatever come in. And, if the customer only wanted a line borer, I mean, that's what we got to do. But we definitely did get in a position where we can be a little more happy and work on the jobs that, now that we got a bunch of guys here, nobody wants to do the job shop type work. They enjoy completing the motor and finishing it. So the employees enjoy it better. And we're doing the builds that we enjoy and that we're confident in, and, see the less liability of it going sour,
Definitely. That's probably a good segue into talking about where Mazworx is today. So let's get a sort of a 30,000 foot view of the operation in terms of location, size, number of staff for a start.
Yeah, I mean, we're located in Sanford, Florida, USA. It's a couple miles outside of Orlando, so we're in Central Florida, Disney area. And it's funny because I do got a lot of customers worldwide that end up taking a family trip to Disney and call me up and say, "Hey, I'm in town. Can I come around and come to the shop and check it out?" I'm like, "All right." So that's pretty interesting. We got a 9,000 square foot facility, 13 employees. The shop's pretty much split up two different ways. We got a production line and an engine line. We've got 8 CNC machines, all the engine machines needed to do all engine work. The engine line has the most people because it's very manual. I got Miguel, he's our main engine builder, last QC guy. I got Brian, he's another engine QC guy. I got Kyle, he's an engine machinist. Gene, he's our CNC operator. I do a lot of the CNC setups and programming. I like being involved in that. I tend to stick with that. And I also do a lot of answering the phones and the sales calls, emails.
In terms of the sort of products and services offered, you've sort of just alluded to the fact you've sort of got a bit of a split in terms of you offer the engines, but you've also ended up moving into product development and manufacture to, I guess, satisfy gaps in the market that you've seen as well. How did that sort of come about? And at what point did you start developing your own Mazworx products?
Actually, we started doing more products before we got in the engine work. So we were probably the first thing we developed, because a lot of the parts we initially developed was for our race team, obviously. See, it was probably 2005. We knew we were going to start racing. I had an S14. We were going to run the SR20. And from my knowledge, back in Japan, is the SR20 transmissions probably can't handle more than 400 horsepower. I had to develop something, and it ended up being our SRVG adapter plate. And we did that back in 2005. To fulfill our racing requirements. And it ended up working out great. And we still make them today and we still sell them. And I bought my first CNC machine to make that adapter. And we still use that machine today. And then from there, we just started making little parts and what we needed, what the customer demands were. As it was basically a small machine, so we couldn't do a lot of production on it. So once we needed more production, we would buy a machine specifically for production. We ended up getting a big machine to where we can do billet blocks in. That work envelope on that machine was big enough to where we can do billet 2Js. And we started making those, the billet SRs and a lot of bigger parts on that machine. And then we were subbing out all our engine machining to another shop, to basically a general engine machine shop. And it was all right. We wanted more control over it. And in the pace we needed all the race car components for our owns and all the R&D stuff, it made sense for start bringing that stuff in-house. So probably over a course of 5 or 10 years, we ended up starting to accommodate some engine machines at the same time. I think we started off doing cylinder heads, was probably the first thing we did. And then we started rolling into the block work and the honing and a lot of the specialized tools, the crank straightener and everything.
Because of course all of this equipment is expensive. So going out and just setting up not only a full CNC machining center for making all your products, but also all of the different equipment required for all of the engine machining operations there, it's not an insignificant outlay in cash. So it makes sense that you're sort of building these up as and when required.
Yeah, it's very expensive to do it all at once. Good thing with the machines in the US, you can lease them. We were able to get leases on them, but obviously you got to make that lease payment every month. So we would pretty much do any work that come in the door so we can make the payments. And it was also to help support our race team. We were racing, we were R&D and playing around with things, this and that. And at the same time, we can make a few bucks on it doing customer stuff. But yeah, then we started growing things both at the same time. We buy a CNC machine, we buy an engine machine, buy a CNC machine, buy an engine machine. Because nowadays, the machine, the SR20s are 20, 30 years old. So a lot of the parts that Nissan used to make for them, the small little parts, they no longer make. So we make them to support our builds. And also too, they make some of the other parts, but we do so many blocks that we can justify making all the small parts ourselves and also sell them to customers. Probably the biggest thing that we accomplished was doing those threaded freeze plugs. So we make those in-house. We send them out to get anodized. We laser them in-house. All our engines get them, and it's a good piece to have on. And it shows our brand of engine blocks. So it seems like both sides, like the CNC side supports the engine side, but the engine side also supports the CNC side with all the small parts it needs to finish engine builds.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I'm going to be a bit selfish here. And basically, I'm going to pick your brains on SR20 stuff because as you know, and probably most of our listeners, we've got our own SR20 VE turbo combo running in our endurance car, and it is, full disclosure, sporting quite a number of Mazworx parts, and I've dealt with you over the last few years as we're building that engine up. But the SR20, probably one of the most well-known and most popular JDM four-cylinder turbo engines. I'm going to actually start with unpopular opinion. When I was running my tuning workshop, I was never a fan of the SR20 DET. We were known for our work in the Mitsubishi world, the Mitsubishi Evo, generally just down to my drag car. So we were doing a lot of those, and I kind of always would sort of look at a combination, and we'd do similar components into a 4G63 in terms of maybe cams, turbo, etc. And then we'd do the same build on an SR20 DET, and every time it's just down, and it just never performed as well as the 4G63. And then kind of this VE or VVL cylinder head came along, and I know at the time I was involved in an S14 road race car for one of my customers, and I've been tuning this thing for a number of years. It ran in a class that was boost limited, and it performed pretty much like I'd expect any SR20 DET to perform, kind of average. Sorry to all the SR20 fans out there, but that's just my experience. And then for the upcoming season of racing, they swapped to this VVL cylinder head from a P11 Primera. I had no idea of what this head was. And at the same time, the class had actually dropped the boost limit. And I think it had gone from 18 PSI down to 16 PSI. But stupidly, at the same point, they'd also, this was to reduce power, but stupidly, they'd also allowed E85 fuel. So I took this engine that was previously the DET head, they swapped the VVL head onto it, gone to E85, we dropped the boost limit down, and lo and behold, this thing it made like another 100 horsepower. It was absolutely just out the gate ridiculous. And for me, that was kind of like a aha moment. The light bulb went on. So let's start with that. What's your opinion? Does your experience match mine on the DE/DET head versus the VVL heads?
Yeah, my experience matches it, and a lot of our customers' experience matches it from the stories I hear. Yeah, back when we started racing in NHRA in 2006 with the SR20 DET, yeah, we went through the troubles of the rocker arms. That was our biggest nemesis, and we ended up running that motor for 2 years. And after the second year, I almost threw in the towel. I'm like, we can't do this. I'm like, we're just killing ourselves.
What are the problems for those who are completely fresh to these engines? What are the problems with the rocker arms in the DET head?
Well, from what we've seen, I mean, it's not really an RPM issue. We've gone solids. We've revved the motor out to 9,500 RPM, and everything will handle. It's when you get in the two-step, when you get in the anti-lag and drag applications, that exhaust pressure with the valve open if it hangs the valve open for a millisecond, it'll separate the rocker arm, and then it'll dislodge off the locators, and the cam will come back around and break the rocker arm with the floating rocker arm setup.
So it's a valve control element with the two-step, because you are getting these pressure spikes in the exhaust, which they can pop the exhaust valve back off the seat and when it gets high enough, and then you lose control where basically the rocker arm is no longer in contact with the cam / where it's located on the top of the valves. And this is also quite a big, heavy piece that's in the valve train. So you lose control of that, and as you mentioned, then the cam comes around, wipes it out, and breaks it in half. So ensuing carnage results, right?
Yeah, bent valves. Most likely, if you break the exhaust rocker, it'll break the intake rocker. And we dealt 2 years trying to solve the problems, and there's nothing that we've done that could eliminate the possibility of that happening.
With the VVL head, and again, for those who've never heard of that, I mean, it's essentially, I liken it to Nissan's take on Honda's VTEC, right? We've got a 3-lobe cam for each cylinder, basically a high RPM, high power cam lobe, and then a smaller lobe that operates at lower RPM, hydraulically switched using the engine oil pressure. Interestingly, it is still a rocker arm cylinder head or valve actuation, but the key difference here is that rocker arm is now shaft located, so it can't get away on us, correct?
Yes. We struck a deal with some racers up north, and we ended up going to build him. It was actually the first iteration of the S15. I don't know if you remember the green one. We were going to race NHRA. We actually had to start with an existing car, so we ended up cutting that car up and building like a 3/4 / half chassis car with it, a modified car. And we were obviously going to use SR20, and it's like, well, what are we going to do? And then talked to some guys in South Florida. It's like, man, you need to look at that VVL head. So we ended up getting hold of one, and we're looking at it, and we're like, wow, this might be our answer. So we ended up going that route. We ended up starting with the shims in it. And first few laps, with the heavy anti-lag we were using, we were spitting some shims, but it wasn't breaking rockers. So we ended up getting, shimless valves made. And ever since then, with the shimless valves on the VVL head, we can run the anti-lag crazy. We can get it on a two-step. We can hit the rev limiter, rev it, and it just kept everything alive. If it wasn't for the VVL head, I probably still wouldn't be doing SR20s, honestly, because we were about to throw the towel in as far as a racing application.
If it wasn't for the VVL head, I can guarantee we would not have an SR20 in our 8.6 either, for all of those same reasons. Now, there's a bunch of stuff you just talked about here. I just want to go back and unpack in a little bit more detail. You've talked about shims, you've talked about shimless valves, and a bunch of people listening probably sort of thinking to themselves, well, what on earth are we talking about? So what we need to understand is with a solid valve train, we have what's referred to as valve lash, which is a clearance between, in this case it's measured between the cam lobe and the rocker that the cam lobe swipes across. So we need this sort of clearance, maybe it's sort of 8 to 10 thousandths of an inch or thereabouts. And that is adjusted by using a different thickness shim that sits essentially on the top of the valve between the rocker arm and the top of the valve, and it locates in the top of the retainer. So by swapping in shims of different thickness, we can get that clearance exactly where we need it. The problem with these shims is that when we're using a ignition cut style of limiter, so that might be a rev limiter, it might be a boost limiter, or as you're referring to here, for effective anti-lag or two-step launch control, what we actually need to do is use an ignition cut so that we've got unburned fuel and air going right through a cylinder, and then it ignites in the exhaust manifold and turbocharger. That provides the exhaust gas energy to spool the turbo. And on these small capacity engines with large turbos, that's essential if you want to get them off the line. The downside with that is it comes back to what I was mentioning before. We're getting these pressure spikes in the exhaust in particular. It doesn't take too much to pop a valve off its seat when it should be closed, and then we get this loss of valve train control. And then when we get excessive clearance between the rocker and the shim, those shims can pop out. Okay, that's a really long-winded explanation, but everything I've said there, sort of, that's about right. A good way of explaining it?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so solutions to that. You've talked about shimless valves. Take us through what that is. I mean, there's a pretty clear hint in the name, but just treat me like an idiot.
Well, essentially, you're just taking the valve and you're increasing the stem length, the thickness of the valve. And instead of using a shim to set your clearance, you basically, during the machining process ahead, you would just tip the valve to set your clearance, and the valve would or the rocker would ride directly on the tip of the valve to actuate it versus going through a shim, like you stated. So it eliminates that possibility of anything popping out during heavy two-step or anti-lag.
It makes sense. Obviously, there's some downsides in terms of if your lash gets too great. In other words, if there's wear or something in the system, you can't just put in a thicker shim and take that up. Obviously, the only solution there is to go to a new valve and set your lash again. Now, difficult without sort of visuals here in a podcast format, but I actually don't know off the top of my head, the diameter of the SR20 valve is sort of, 5.5 or 6 mil or something like that?
Yeah, the stem is 6 millimeter. The P12s are the only ones that came 5.5.
Okay. So, and again, we don't have a reference here. I don't actually know what the diameter of the standard shim is, but I'm going to guess it's probably more like about 10 or 12 millimeters.
It's 10 millimeters.
10 millimeters, okay, good guess. So we go from something, a surface area of 10 millimeters in diameter that the tip of the rocker is sort of wearing against or riding against, and we go down to 6 millimeters. I mean, on face value, I would assume that isn't necessarily a great thing from a mechanical standpoint. Does this prove to be a problem or no?
Actually, it did not. Even because we started off with blanks and we start machining our own valves, and when you do that, you don't end up with a hard tip like you would with a production type valve. We supported a drifter in Formula D. His name was Dave Briggs for quite a few years, and we did a lot of R&D with him with this exact setup. And he would go a whole year in a drift season, a Formula D season, and believe it or not, the little to no wear as far as it gaining any type of lash or wear on the tip of the valves, nothing abnormal. So it going through that process definitely gave us a lot more confidence in the setup. Plus, too, if you look at the Hondas are 5.5 millimeters, and those rocker arms ride right on tips of the valves. They got the adjustable tips, on the rockers to set the lash. It ended up working out good, and we haven't really seen any adverse wear or on the tips of the valves. If the motor is ran hard or if it's over revved or something weird, we would see the tip of the valve mushroom a little bit. So when we go to disassemble the head, we have to do some extra grinding to get the valve out. But under normal, even heavy load, it seems to be pretty reliable.
So you wouldn't class this as a drag race only modification, because obviously the usage is very different. I mean, yes, the engines might be making 1,500 plus horsepower, but they do a 6-second pass or whatever it may be. And if you get maybe 4 or 5 of those in a day, you're probably doing really, really well versus, I do 1 lap of my local racetrack. I've probably done more kilometers on the engine than a drag car is going to do in a season, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Coming back to these differences, I mean, all things being equal, yes, we've fixed this problem with the reliability of the rockers compared to the DET. But the VTEC mechanism, or VVL mechanism in Nissan lingo, that's definitely an advantage in terms of gaining a wider power band, just like VTEC. But if we're actually just purely focused on the high RPM performance, once we're past that VVL switchover point, for all things being equal, that mechanism then doesn't really give any advantage. So is it safe to assume that Nissan also highly modified or highly improved the flow through the ports in order to make the power gains that we see with these heads?
Oh, definitely. I mean, out of the box, OEM, the VVL heads outperform as far as airflow characteristics than a DET. And I think generally it's because it's naturally a NA motor. So it needed that extra efficiency and breathing to make that power at higher RPM. Where I believe the DET motors, they were worried about more mid-range, power with the spool up, high velocity, air coming through the ports, especially with the S13 heads with the big horseshoe type ports. They weren't worried about max flow. They were probably more worried about response with the turbocharger.
Sure, yeah. Just bolting on the VVL head and really doing nothing else, you're going to see, well, in my experience, gains everywhere and substantial. So Nissan obviously got this pretty well right on the money. In terms of cams, though, I'm interested again on your take here. And obviously, what you need to do in a drag application is going to be different for what will work in a street or a road race application. I've had some experience with when we first started, I used a Calford cam. I think it was a 184 ST profile, I think. Don't quote me on that. And no disrespect to Calford, we deal with those guys on just about all of our builds, and they make some great product. But what I found is as soon as we got the thing onto the dyno, it just wanted to rev to the moon. We were building an endurance car, so I really didn't want to rev this thing much past about sort of 8,500 RPM. And I think, once we sort of got it dialed in on the dyno, I was running to 9 and the power was still going up, and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's great for a drag car, but not really what we want. I ended up actually, after talking to a bunch of people, I swapped to a stock P12 cam, and what that ended up doing was bringing our power band down a little bit. We lost a bit of power in the top end, which was to be expected, but what I was more interested in was the bottom end response. So, I'm interested in your take. Sort of what cams do you find work well? Are you using aftermarket cams? Yeah, what's your take on it?
Yeah, we strictly use Calford cams for the VVL. They do have a pretty good selection now. For motors 400 to 600 horsepower, we found that that 184 LT cam, it's a very low duration turbo cam, seems to be working pretty good. Depending on the application of the motor is how obviously you want to select the cam, the turbocharger size. Calford worked with us when we were doing the drifting. They ended up developing a high response cam for us. It ended up being basically a rally type cam, and it works really good. And we ended up getting rid of VVL for that application because we were more worried about mid-range response. So it's a very low duration, high lift cam, and it worked great for a lot of the drifters. Now for the drag racing, we did the same thing. We got rid of the VVL, and our power band, we were just worried about straight RPM. I think our current motor, we rev it out to about 12,500 RPM, and it's being pretty stable. Getting rid of VVL also helps too with the weight of the rocker. I mean, we take off 35 grams by emptying out the rocker, and we can take off a little bit more by separating them and spacing them. Controlling the valve train, at 100 pounds of boost, 12,500 RPM.
Weight's the enemy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And again, I mean, just people might be thinking, well, why get rid of that VVL other than the weight advantage you've just mentioned? But the VTEC mechanism is designed to give an engine that will idle nicely, drive nicely at low RPM, but then we've got that high load. But for a drag application, we don't care. If it idles at 1800 RPM, that's fine. And basically from the moment that the engine's on the two-step limiter to the time the chute gets pulled at the end of the strip, it's always sort of between, I'm guessing with yours, maybe between sort of 9.5, 10,000 and 12,500 RPM. So the VTEC mechanism would offer no advantage.
Correct. Well, it's more of a disadvantage because you get all that added weight and instability in the valve train. All of our street motors we build, we 100% keep the VVL just because you got that big broad power band, you got the drivability, the idle quality, and you can rev it out to 9,000 RPM.
It kind of, I mean, for a road application, I think it is the best of both worlds. The only thing it's probably lacking where the K20 has the advantages, the continuously variable cam control as well. That'd be nice, but Nissan just never went there with that particular engine, so a little unfortunate for us. In terms of the VVL actuation, there's two variants between the P11 and the P12. If my memory serves correct, the P11 has individual actuation of the VTEC mechanism on the intake and the exhaust cam, where the P12, they kind of just simplified things and there's one solenoid that switched both at the same time. Any sort of pros or cons of either?
I mean, we've never got into that too deep as far as what's good with, as far as the tuning aspect of actuating one or the other or at the same time. Most of the stuff we deal with is a rear-wheel drive conversion where the firewall is your biggest enemy there. So you're kind of stuck with one solenoid.
Yeah, that solenoid, again, for those who aren't aware, sits on what becomes the back of the cylinder head in a rear-wheel drive application. So it gets quite cumbersome to fit that between the head and the firewall if you've got the two solenoids. But you actually make a product to swap to the single actuation, don't you?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Another aspect that I've personally witnessed in everyone that I talk to who's run the VVL heads hard for long periods of time, this keeps coming up, which is wear on the rockers. And this is problematic because you can't buy these parts from Nissan anymore. Now, we've been told to run a very specific oil. We've tried that. Maybe it helped. It didn't fix it. We've gone through some secret modifications to get more oil flow up to the parts in the cylinder head that require it. Being told that that's the bulletproof fix. It absolutely is not a bulletproof fix. So what's your take on this? Is there a bulletproof fix for the rocker wear?
I mean, the only thing I can think of that we haven't done yet is just go to a roller rocker. That would be probably fix everything, but I mean that's gonna change a lot of things. But we've had the same thing with the wear on the rocker. We've increased oiling to the head. I mean the downside of the SR20 cylinder heads, it does consume a lot of oil, so you'll have a lot of oil in transit from the head down back to the sump. We've increased the hole sizes in the spray bars. We've increased the oil supply to the head, and what we've seen is not necessarily the cam getting or lack of oil. It would probably be the backside of the lobe is what's been getting dry. Whereas the spray bars, when the oil's spraying on the cam's rotating so fast, it can't lubricate the backside of the cam. So we've noticed that always getting a little worn out as it hits the rocker arm. The cam will hit the rocker arm and wipe the oil off the rocker arm and then hit the dry side of the cam.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And start causing a little wear.
I've also wondered as well, because you're always dealing with maybe a brand new cam on an existing rocker assembly that's maybe done 50, 60, 100,000 miles with an older cam, like the original cam that came in that engine. There's got to be some level of wear on those original rockers. Is that an issue where you're matching basically a worn used rocker with a brand new cam, or even vice versa, a different cam than what the rocker has worn into?
Yeah, I mean, if you're starting off with a rocker with wear, you're only going to decrease the life quicker. Anytime we build a new motor, we want to get those rockers, virgin rockers that look the best, look almost mirrorish, but motors that basically just came straight out of junkyards. And start off with new cams, and that's what we've seen have the best life. Yeah, but once the rockers start wearing, then you just keep the same cams there until they just die.
The other element that I've just sort of been considering lately, and you may have some experience with this, is whether there's an advantage in going to something like a DLC coating on the rocker surface itself.
We've tried that. Unfortunately, the DLC coating is not able to stick that well to an old oil impregnated surface. We've DLC coated them, few laps, it just cracks and comes off.
Thank you for saving me the time and money. I will not do that now.
I mean, you could try it if you want.
If you want to develop a roller rocker assembly, I'll be happy to put my hand up and do some testing on that product if it comes out.
We've been debating on making billet rockers, but that's a whole nother journey. I mean, the complexity of machining. I mean, machining them's not bad. It's the hardness, getting the hardness correct, getting the material correct, and getting the grinding correct. And there's only a few machines that can actually grind that accurately. And those machines are not cheap. They're aerospace grade machines. And so the next feasible option will be just to go to a roller rocker, which we're exploring. You know, that now it's like you said, the brand new rockers you can't get them. I mean, we've worked with Nissan Motorsports USA. We've begged them. We've pleaded them. We've asked them, how many do we need to order to get these back in production? We'll whatever we need to do. And their counterpart in Japan just says, nope.
Yeah.
Discontinued.
It's unfortunate. I guess if you did go down that path of the roller rocker, by virtue of the fact you've got to be removing some friction from the valve train, that might also show an improvement in performance as well. Yeah,
definitely. Because when you roll over by hand, a K20 motor versus an SR, you can just instantly feel the lower amount of resistance in a K motor than you can in an SR.
Probably a great point to get your take on. I mean, obviously, you kind of primarily a Nissan guy. I didn't really have a dog in the fight, so to speak, when we put the SR20 into our 8.6. We had a bunch of people, particularly when we were having issues at the start, say, oh, you should have K-swapped it. And I mean, to that, I'd say, yeah, absolutely, you're right. No argument. The only reason the 8.6 ended up with the SR20 in it is because we had that engine. It was built for another car. We had 4.5 weeks before the start of our endurance series. So if we wanted to go racing, that was the option. This is over COVID where, we just the whole world was shut. We couldn't get the parts for the engine we wanted to build. So that's how we ended up with that. I mean, I've tuned a lot of SR20s. I've tuned a lot of K20s. To me, these two sit above just about any other 4-cylinder double overhead cam engine in terms of their cylinder heads just flow that well. If you had to pick a winner, which is it?
Well, obviously my heart's in SR20. As far as a race motor, all-out race motor, I mean, the K definitely has a lot of strong characteristics to it. As far as nostalgic goes, I would say the SR is there as one of the top motors in the nostalgic world. And that's what, honestly, in our business, we do a lot of motor builds, SRs, and then 95% of them are those guys that have a 30-year-old motor that, have an S14 and S15 that just want to get it built, 300 to 400 horsepower. And that's probably the majority of our motor builds.
Not everyone needs 1,000 horsepower to keep them happy.
Exactly. Yeah. And then these guys, S15s, they're true Nissan guys. They could put a 2J in it. They could swap an RB in it, but they want to keep it, period correct. And, the SR20 is an iconic motor for the mid 90s. And
yeah, absolutely.
As far as nostalgic, I would say the SR. You see K swap. It used to be LS swap everything. Now it's K swap everything.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to stand out. I mean, the other element, coming back to keeping everything sort of period correct, is all of these cars, almost irrespective of brand now, from that period are just skyrocketing in value. So, I think when you're looking at modifications at a path for modifying the car, you really do have to think carefully about how the changes you make will affect the resale, because these can end up being what is now quite a serious investment.
Oh, yeah. In the U.S., I mean, the S chassis, S13, S14s, they've used them in drifting, drag racing, street racing, everything out there. And now they're getting very hard to find. And when you find them, they're up in price. And if you're going to modify it, you got to be a little smart about it.
I just wanted to take a moment out of our interview with Mark and talk about a package of courses that we've put together that I know is going to be perfect for anyone who is enjoying this interview, and that is our engine building starter package. This package involves a range of our courses that are essentially going to take you from zero previous knowledge up to a point where you're going to be comfortable and confident tackling the assembly of your very first engine. Included in this package is our engine building fundamentals course, which, as its name implies, teaches you the fundamentals of engine operation. You'll learn about the four-stroke process, the components inside the engine. You'll learn about the different machining operations that are going to be required when it comes to machining and building your new engine. This is important because you will be working with an outside machinist, and this will give you the confidence and ability to speak the same language as your machinist. You'll also learn about the clearances and tolerances inside the engine and how we may need to adjust the factory clearances when we're building an engine that's going to make more power, rev further than the factory rev limit, or perhaps both. Moving on from this course, we're also including our practical engine building course, which builds on the knowledge taught in our fundamentals course. This time we introduce a simple step-by-step process that you can apply to building your engine irrespective of what it is. This is a generic course, so it doesn't matter if you're building a stroked supercharged LS, a turbocharged 2JZ, or a naturally aspirated Honda K20, or anything in between for that matter. We know that when it comes time to start assembling your engine, it can be a little bit daunting knowing what to do first and what order to progress in. Well, by following the HPA 10-step engine building process, you'll find that each of the individual steps is relatively quick and easy to complete, and in no time you've got a completely assembled engine, and you're going to have the confidence that when it comes time to start it, it's going to operate exactly as you'd expect. All of the parts chosen, the clearances inside the engine are going to be perfect for your application, and the engine's going to deliver great power, great torque, but most importantly, great engine reliability. Moving on from this part of the course, we then move into our library of worked examples, which is an informal walkthrough of that 10-step process that you can watch being applied in real time to a real engine building task. And here we vary the type of engine we're building to give you experience on a wide range of different platforms. We also include our How to Degree a Cam course. This is probably one of the most common modifications made when building a performance engine, swapping out the factory cam or cam shafts for a more aggressive profile. While this can be a great path to achieving more power or more performance from your engine, it does rely on installing and degreeing that cam accurately. This course will teach you exactly how to do this. Again, irrespective whether you're dealing with a single cam pushrod engine or a quad cam V12 or anything in between, we include a simple 6-step process that you can apply to degreeing your own cam. And again, we back this up with a library of worked examples. You're also going to get 24 months of gold membership, which gives you access to our private members only forum. This is the best place to get reliable answers to your specific engine building questions. You'll also get access to our weekly live webinars where we vary the topics we're teaching between engine building, tuning, wiring, race car setup, data analysis, race driver education, and even 3D modeling and CAD. You'll also get access to our archive of existing webinars. There's over 300 hours of content in that archive. It is one of the fastest ways to expand your knowledge on a wide range of performance automotive topics. The cost of this package is usually $299 but you can use the coupon code MAZWORX50. That's MAZWORX50. That'll get you 50% off the purchase price, and we will put a link to that package as well as the coupon code in the show notes. Let's get back to our chat with Mark now. Let's talk about another shortcoming of the SR20. I'm not trying to bash on the engine too much, but
let's continue the continuation of the shortcomings.
Absolutely. Yeah, coming from my 4G63 world, obviously one of the other advantages with the 63 is a cast iron block. Now, pros and cons, it's obviously heavy, but it's also the structural integrity is there. And we've run north of 1100 wheel horsepower on the stock block. I mean, these days, I think people are up around the 1400 wheel horsepower with the stock block before sort of billet comes into play. You're not going to do that with a stock SR20 DET block because it's a cast aluminum as opposed to cast iron. But of course there are solutions to some of these problems. Namely, let's start with sleeving the block, fitting ductile iron sleeves. And I mean, this is not a new technology. This is common for alloy blocks. However, in this part of the world, over here in New Zealand, and I hear this from people all around the world, so I guess it's not just our machine shops, the issues come down to more often than not, people will machine the block to fit a set of Darden sleeves, for example, and assemble everything up, and then one of the sleeves will drop in operation and the head gasket starts leaking. And I mean, by drop, I'm talking, it only needs to be a few thou. It's not a lot.
Not even, like a 1 thou.
Yeah, there we go. So this is the constant sort of argument I hear against sleeving. But at some point, if you want to make more power, unfortunately, it's going to be an essential if you don't want to go to a billet block. So what's your take on this, and how do you avoid these sleeves dropping in operation?
Well, let's start off with the SR20 block. The sleeves are casted in place. So the deck of the block is completely aluminum. So, and in between the cylinders is that little water slit. That seems to be the weakest point. So our rule of thumb is any motor over 400 horsepower, we sleeve. We base these numbers off of not just on the dyno, but I mean, like if you're going to run it hard on the street or at the track, a good 400 horsepower. Because the first spot you'll see anything distorting is in between the cylinders. It'll push into that slit and it'll blow the head gasket. And at that point, you can still sleeve it. It's not damaged beyond repair. And we would install the dart and sleeves. I mean, we've got that process down quite well. As far as the sleeves dropping, that's definitely an installation issue because we've learned that lesson pretty quick. When we first started sleeving back in, I want to say 2006, 2007 is when we started doing our own machine work. What we ended up doing is in the sleeving process, we would make sure with the dart and sleeves, they have the top flange, which that is where the sleeves actually sit in the block, and they should sit. We've noticed that if you install the sleeves and let the block cool, after a certain amount of time, the sleeves would start coming out, 2 or 3 thou. It doesn't take much. The block would basically try to squeeze the sleeve out. So when we install the sleeves, we torque plate it and we let it cool the torque plate on. And then after it's sat for a few hours overnight, we could let the sealant, cure and everything. We would put it in the CNC machine and we would step deck it. We would put it in the machine and immediately take the torque plate off and step deck it. And we would leave the sleeve about 3 thou proud of the block. So that would give some room for the block to grow and shift and actually concentrate the clamping force around the cylinder.
Yep. A couple of things that come to mind with this is one, I'm assuming, but don't know for sure, that you're using CNC boring equipment for this process?
Yes.
Okay, so my question there, to me, I'm not a machinist, but with a broad, basic understanding of manual versus CNC machining, I would think it's going to be difficult, but absolutely not impossible for a good machinist with a manual boring machine to get the level of precision that you can on a CNC, or is it really just it's not difficult to get that same repeatability and precision?
I mean, it's going to take a well-trained guy, 3 or 4 days to get it right on a manual machine.
Okay.
And it's not easy. But in the CNC machine, the machine does all the work.
Yeah, of course. The other element that sort of comes into this as well is, for those who sort of don't know what's involved, you're basically machining out almost the entirety of the inside of the block. And I'm wondering, machining all of that material out of an aluminium block is going to obviously create a lot of heat. With the way the block moves around with heat, does that also play into how those sleeves are going to sit? You sort of mentioned there putting your torque plate on, letting everything cool, so I'm guessing there is something to that.
Yeah, I mean, every engine block has its own characteristics. As far as the SR20, when we install the dart and sleeves, we don't go much past the factory sleeve. Let me think. Actually, we do. We go quite a bit past that factory sleeve, but it's a dry type block. It's a closed deck, so you're not really getting into the water jackets. There's still some aluminum backing when you install the sleeve. But we do notice that, taking that much material out and jamming a sleeve in there, it's going to distort the block a little bit. So when we do sleeve installs, we don't just install the sleeves. We go through the whole engine block and machine everything. We'll true up even the main cap pads. We'll line bore it, even though, we're not putting billet caps on it. We would grind the caps down and line bore the block again. So we'll go back through and bring the block to spec, especially when we put sleeves in it, because we would hone them. We would try to just do a line hone, and you can really see with line honing it that the main tunnel isn't as true as it used to be. So we would just go ahead and just line bore the whole thing and just start fresh.
That was going to be one of my next questions, and it makes sense. You're doing such significant work to the block, and it's an aluminium block. It's expected it's going to move around a little bit. You kind of mentioned that you don't, but I would have assumed that if you're going to go to the extremes of fitting sleeves, that you would also probably be matching that with a set of billet main caps, which was the next sort of weak point I was going to talk about with the DE blocks or DET blocks. Is there a sort of a power level that you find those billet caps are essential?
Probably about 700-800 horsepower normally in a street application. And drifting, a lot of the lower horsepower guys, even though doing a lot of clutch kicks, we'd put main caps in there, because we've seen with Dave Briggs, his first motor we had, he was making about 700 horsepower. But in a drifting application, we got the motor back after 1 year, open it up, and number 4, number 5 cap were busted, and we're like, whoa, like, how's this motor still together? So then we're like, we're gonna put billet main caps in any kind of drifting application motor.
It's interesting that you say that sort of 700-800 horse, because the first engine that we had in our 86, we were aiming for 450-500 horse, and that's kind of where we ended up. It actually could make quite a bunch more than that, but for endurance racing, that's kind of where we were running at. 450 with a push to pass might have taken us up to 500. And I felt at that power level, with the research that I'd done, and I think I talked to you about it as well, we should be home and hosed with the factory caps. And I think 3 events in, practice day, rolled it off out of the trailer, and straight away leaving pit lane, it had a weird vibration. And I couldn't really sort of put my finger on it. It was a bit of a vibration, but we'd also been chasing a vibration from the sequential gearbox that we were running at the time. So this wasn't necessarily new, and I kind of put it down to that. Anyway, basically, the day just progressed from bad to worse, and we ended up with an oil leak, which progressively got worse. We couldn't figure out where that was coming from. We thought it was the rear main, which it was for an obvious reason, which we'll get to. And anyway, it sort of started, this vibration just started getting worse and worse. And at a point, you're like, nah, my spidey senses are tingling here. Some shit is far from right. Let's call it. We ended up pulling the sump off in place at the track. And sure enough, I think 3 or maybe 4 of the 5 caps were just cracked straight through the middle. And we must have been a lap away from grenading the entire engine. And, that was, for me, I was like, all right, well, I guess now we build the engine with billet caps. But like I say, that was 450 odd horsepower, maybe 500 on a good day. So I didn't think we were really stretching its legs. However, as I mentioned, it's one of these things, what is the root cause? As I mentioned, we were chasing this vibration from the gearbox, which we fixed by fitting a Hollinger. But we ran the car for maybe the better part of a season with this high-speed vibration. When I'm saying high-speed vibration, like at the end of the front straight at our longest tracks, 6th gear, just about on the rev limiter, the vibration is so bad you couldn't see out of the mirrors. And the breaking point was basically the fear of God, because you thought the thing was going to explode. That's what I'm talking about. And even with our older V8, that had caused cracking of a number of components. So I wondered if that was actually the root cause, because everyone you talk to, that shouldn't be a power level where the factory caps would fail. And it sounds like you agree.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that. Yeah. It's like I said, in drag race applications, or at least we didn't see many caps breaking, because we immediately went to the billet caps. But in the drift car with all those clutch kickers, we definitely saw caps break. So definitely something shocked it, or something, like you said, the vibration had been the cause. All
right, let's go into another couple of elements here. And again, this is sort of getting pretty tech nerdy for the Nissan SR20 guys and girls out there, but let's go there. There's 2 types of bearings available, both for the main bearings and the big end. So there's the N14 GTIR, and then there's your conventional SR20 DET. There's some subtle differences with the main bearings. There's additional oiling holes in the GTIR bearing. The conrod or big end bearings are 1mm wider in the GTIR. You can machine the block to take the GTIR main bearings, and likewise you can fit them into the conrod. So what's your take? Is this sort of a no-brainer, absolutely essential modification?
Definitely the main bearings, with the 5-hole main bearings. I mean, every motor that comes through, every block we get, we machine them for the 5-hole main bearings. It's definitely a no-brainer on that one. As far as the rod bearings, usually our rule of thumb is after 600 horsepower, we would put the bigger rod bearings in.
Okay. In terms of those modifications, what's actually required in machining for the block, and is it a case of ordering a connecting rod to suit the GTIR bearing, or what's involved?
Well, in the block, in the main journal area, where you see the single hole feed from the main oil galley to the main bearing, we would machine a groove across there that would kind of mimic if you ever seen a GTIR engine. So it would leave a passageway to be able to supply the 5 holes in that GTIR main bearing. Now, as far as the rod bearing, the tang is in a different location. So when we get most rods you buy are tanged for the 17mm bearing, the standard bearing. And we'll just, on the opposite side, we would machine new tangs to locate the 19mm bearing.
Oh, sorry, yeah, 2 millimeters wider, not 1 millimeter wider. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, we had Krillo make us some custom heavy duty rods that we already just pre-tanned for the 19 millimeter.
Yeah. I mean, these are modifications, though, that any performance machine shop should be pretty well up to speed with doing it. So there's nothing magic here, is there?
No. It's not magic. It's pretty standard machine work.
Okay. The other element that always goes into a high-performance engine build is the fasteners used, and ARP is probably the sort of go-to off-the-shelf part. And you've actually worked with ARP to manufacture your own specific stud kits for both the head studs and the main studs. Can you talk to us about why you've gone that path? What was the difference between yours and the off-the-shelf offerings?
Yeah, because we used to use the off-the-shelf ones, and after a few times, we would notice the threads in the block distort, and we wondered why. We just took a good look at it, and it seems that they design a lot of their studs, at least classically, as if what they're screwed into is an iron block, which really you only need about an inch and a quarter of threads to be secured in an iron block. And if you look at the SR20 main bolt and how much threads on it and how much it engages, it does that for a reason. So we went ahead and we talked to ARP. They didn't want to change the design, but they were willing to make us our own custom stud. So we ended up drawing up what we needed and submitted it to them. And it's been probably a good 12 years, and they've been making them for us since then. And it's been a pretty popular product, and built a good relationship with ARP, and it's worked out pretty good.
The other advantages I see it with your studs, and I'm pretty sure that off-the-shelf offering from ARP still don't do this, is, again, hard to explain, but basically you've got a little extension at the end of the stud beyond the threads. And the idea behind this is that when you wind the studs into the block, and I mean, you're not supposed to be torquing these up, they just really need to be just a finger tight or just a little bit beyond, but essentially you're then tightening this into that blind hole in the block on that little extension, rather than concentrating stress on the bottom thread, which would be with a conventional stud with no extension. Horrible way of explaining it, but there are advantages with that? And if so, what is the problem if you're tightening it down on that bottom thread?
Well, yeah, the standard stud is off-the-shelf ARP stud. That top thread in the block would always get a little bit damaged every time you put that stud in. It would constantly get a little bit damaged, because that's what you're seating on. You're seating it on that top thread in the block, and you're constantly pressing it. Whereas with the bullnose, you're torquing it down to the bottom of the hole, so you're maintaining the integrity of all the threads, and you're using up as much threads as you can to pull on it. So you're not really damaging it.
Another thing, I haven't seen this myself, I don't know if you've had this experience, but a colleague of mine here in New Zealand who specialises in SR20s has seen at sort of around the 500 kilowatt mark at the wheels with those off-the-shelf ARP studs, has actually seen cracking in the block through that sort of main journal where the stud actually tightens in that top thread. Again, I don't know if that's something you've seen as well, but they went away from the ARP offering to yours and never saw that issue again.
Well, that comes down to it's only pulling on the top part of the thread, so you're concentrating the thread or the stress at the top of the thread, whereas utilizing all the threads, you're spreading out the stress through all the threads and digging deeper into the block.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of the head gasket sealing and the head studs, quite a common modification is to rethread the block for an oversized head stud, hence giving a stronger stud with more clamping force. At what power level is that essential? And then the flip side of this is, are the downsides in terms of that extra clamping force distorting the cylinder heads, particularly in terms of valve seating? Well,
yeah, I mean, our rule of thumb is motors over 600 horsepower, we end up going to a half-inch head stud. We talked about doing L19s, the custom-made 625s, the standard size, but we've been so confident and successful with the half-inch head stud that we really haven't seen a reason why to change it. So we kept it that way. That stud, we actually machine it, and it goes a little bit deeper than the factory stud. So it pulls pretty deep in the block, and it's been pretty stable. As far as distortion, anytime you add clamping force to anything, you're going to see distortion. So it's one of those things that you kind of got to take it in order to progress. We've never gone that deep to see what exactly distorts on the seat. We would vacuum check cylinder heads, torqued on, and everything seems to be pulling pretty good vacuum. The only thing is with the drag motors, especially all the abuse they go through, the valves will get unseated after a few laps. That's just part of the game. I mean, at 90 pounds of boost, they're going to seal up.
Yeah. I know that there are some cylinder head specialists that will try and preempt this by essentially using a torque plate on the cylinder head. Torque plates on the blocks are pretty much par for the course for boring and honing, but actually using a torque plate on the cylinder head to replicate that distortion when those head studs are torqued down, and then cutting the valve seats with that torque plate. So essentially, theory being that the valve should seat properly when the head's on the engine. Is that something you've experimented with, something you use?
We never really experimented with that. I would imagine you got to kind of mimic the amount of bend you're putting in the cylinder head, because with the 3 thou step deck and then with the grommet style head gaskets we use, that probably add another 2 thou to that pinch. You're probably bending the head, bending the block quite a bit. So to mimic that, you might take some experimentation.
Yeah, makes sense.
But we've never really gone that deep into it, because a lot of the drag motors we do, we pull them apart every outing. Street motors we don't get too extreme with. A lot of the DET motors that we build, we do max 600 horsepower.
So you don't see these sorts of problems at that power level?
No, we won't get that aggressive with the half-inch head studs or anything like that.
Talking about the other element here, the actual head gasket, you mentioned a grommet-style head gasket. What works at sort of the 400 to 600 horsepower level is probably quite different to what works at the 1,000-plus horsepower level. So for the dedicated drag setups, can you give us some sort of insight into what you've found is effective in terms of head gasket sealing?
Our 2,000 horsepower motors, we're pretty much still using the classic O-ring, stainless steel O-ring in the cylinder head.
Yep. Is that stainless steel O-ring coupled with a receiver groove and a copper gasket, that style?
Correct. Yeah. We've been doing that setup for, probably since day one. I would say probably good 12 years. And it's been successful. I mean, there's better stuff out there now, but it's like, wow, it's working. Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, plus there's going to be a learning curve going to a different technique or a different option as well. So yeah, if it isn't broken, there's not much reason to fix it.
We did experiment a little bit with the copper firing setup. We've done that on the 2Js, because with our Pro Street billet blocks, we run high horsepower with the water going through the head gasket. We worked a little bit with making the copper firing setup for 2Js and SRs, and that's been pretty successful at 1,000, 1,200 horsepower on SRs. The MLS head gasket we use head gasket made out of Japan. They make them for us. We used to get them through Power Enterprise, but now we get them through Apexy. But it's the same manufacturer in Japan. I can't remember the actual manufacturer's name. But those MLS head gaskets been pretty reliable up to about 1,000. But after that, after about 40, 45 pounds of boost, they tend to not hold up too well. And that's when we would jump to the copper firing type head gasket.
Okay. All right, let's talk the next logical evolution in terms of making more power with the SR20 or just about any engine that's a billet block, and kind of seen an explosion in the availability of these from a range of manufacturers over the last decade or so. And I think that's also led to a spiraling in terms of power levels and dropping of ETs, etc. At what point did you sort of start thinking, hey, you know what, maybe we should make our own billet block?
Yeah, it was probably back when we were running the first S15. I mean, we would run the motor, one event, pull it apart, and it would just basically fall apart by itself. The block would lose integrity. The main caps would lose position. They would lose pinch. And you can just tell the block is getting fatigued. I mean, it wasn't necessarily cracking, but you can just see that it just wasn't holding up to 12, 1,400 horsepower at the time what we were making. And then plus we had the equipment, and we're just like, hey, let's make a billet SR block. We made one, and it worked out pretty good. It was our first design. This is probably back in 2008, 2009, 2010. I can't remember. And we made a couple of them. We ran them, and we went through quite a few iterations before we were happy with them.
What was the design process? I'm interested, sort of how does that even start?
Well, the first block I made for our race team, I took a machinist point of view from it. So you imagine a block of material and how you're going to cut it away, realizing that, as through my engineering classes, is like, that's not the way you do it. You start with nothing and then you design it. So it was very blocky, and it would look like a machinist made it. So then I started from scratch, and I designed one in SolidWorks. I used the software, and at the time I was going to the university, so I took advantage of the engineering lab and started designing my own block there. And it worked out a little bit better, because you can, working with solid models, you can kind of forecast where you need material. You can model it, you can assemble it, rotate your assembly around, see where you need clearance. A lot of things you can do. You don't have to imagine it in your head. You can look at it on a screen and see what you need to do.
Definitely. When you're using something like SolidWorks, it's got some quite powerful tools for analyzing your finished product in terms of FEA, finite element analysis, kind of seeing whether the finished product is going to, on paper or virtual paper, actually stand up to the forces it's going to be exposed to. Did you lean on any of that analysis, or is it just more from a physical kind of gut feeling and experience of what you need?
Well, probably more of a gut feeling. I mean, you can kind of see the factory block where it's at, but when you do the FEA, you got to have a pretty good idea what forces, pretty accurate idea what forces are going to be applied to the block.
Otherwise, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, really, where do you pull on it? Where do you push on it? Where do you twist it? But you can play around with it and see, and just guess and see where your weak points are and beefy that area up. I mean, it sounds a little rudimentary, but I mean, it'll get the job done. I mean, you're only dealing with aluminum. Once you're getting to like aerospace grade parts where weight is a factor, where you need to trim off ounces and pounds off this part and still maintain, a 5 times safety factor, then yeah, FEA gets very, very important. But with race cars, aluminum blocks, I mean, you see all these other blocks out there. Everyone has a different design. One block might weigh 60 pounds, block might weigh 80 pounds, but they still get the job done.
In terms of those iterations you mentioned, what problems did you kind of find once you started validating the performance of your first block? And, how long did it take? How many iterations did it take to kind of wind up on a production-ready part?
Well, the good thing is we make a lot of our parts in-house. So we take very small production runs. And honestly, we've done a lot of iterations throughout the years. And we're still doing iterations. And that's the good thing about doing the production in-house and controlling production. Whereas if you see something on the last batch you can improve, then the next batch you do the improvement, and it doesn't really cost you much. We started making our pro drag blocks back when we first started that initial design, and it was just an all-out race block. It had no features of the factory block. It was rude, crude, and it got the job done. We moved on from that to now our current pro street block, which we've had a lot of street car guys, want to make over 1,000 horsepower reliably. So we're like, all right, well, our pro drag block, it's rude and crude. It utilizes aluminum main caps. We wanted something that kind of can mimic the factory block. So we just started fresh with the design. We had the block scanned, and we do the hard probing here so we can get the accurate errors. And we kind of developed a block that throughout the years of using SolidWorks and solid modeling, I got very proficient at using it. So I just wanted to start fresh. We designed the block. It replicates the factory block quite well and handles big horsepower.
Yeah, okay.
And we integrated the Dart and MI sleeves in this new block so we can have the full capacity of cooling on the street and the racetrack.
Right. I assume that that's one of your big differences between the Pro Drag and the Pro Street is the addition of cooling for the street block, obviously an essential element.
Yes. Yeah, like factory style cooling, MID sleeves, utilizing the factory water pump. Also, we used the chromoly main caps, so to reduce the growth of the tunnel at high temperatures of a street car or a drift car.
It's a good point to get into because we've actually had some discussions that it's sort of gone around over the last few months at HPA with a number of the people we've talked to, and it's difficult. I was over in Sydney for the GTR festival, and it kind of came to a head. You talk to 5 different people about billet blocks and their streetability, and you're going to get 5 different answers. It seems very, it's people who are absolutely the billet alloy block is not a street engine. And I've got just as many people saying, yeah, it's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But it does come down to this growth element here in terms of the thermal expansion coefficient of the aluminium used in a billet block. It's going to expand more than a factory block or a cast iron block for that matter. And hence you end up with clearances that are probably too tight to be ideal at room temperature, so that when everything grows, it's at a suitable clearance hot. But of course, then if you jump in the car, start it up and hit 8,000 RPM as you leave your driveway, I mean, I don't know if anyone's doing that. You probably need your head examined, but it's not going to end well, is it? So you went with the chromoly caps to help alleviate that particular problem on the Pro Street block.
Yeah, because with our Pro Drag block, it's mainly designed for methanol, so that block's shouldn't exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So we torque the block up, throw it in the oven, and heat it up to 150 degrees. And all right, the main tunnel grew about 1 thou. Okay, let's crank this thing up to 225 and see what happens. And it grew about 3 thou. You're like, wow,
that's a big difference.
That's not good.
Yeah.
So that's where we decided on our per street stuff that we would go with the steel cap because we just wanted to experiment and see what happens.
Does that create an issue with the difference in thermal coefficient expansion rates between the block itself, which is the billet alloy, and the chromoly steel cap?
Well, yeah, we noticed that when we used a chromoly cap, that it would grow about a thou and a half at 225. So it's definitely it's maybe
more in line with what you wanted.
Yeah, and then you measure the crank at 225, and it grows about a half thou. So it works out in a better scenario than it would be if it was all aluminum tunnel.
Yep. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. In terms of what's holding this engine back from making more power, I mean, you just threw around numbers of 2,000 horsepower. And I mean, for some sort of idea of what this is resulting in, obviously the car hasn't run for a few years now, but what's your sort of best ETM mile an hour with one of these engines?
So far, it's the Techno Toys S15. We've been 622 at a best mile an hour is like 230, I believe, so far with the single turbo setup.
And I think back when we interviewed either you or maybe Shane T back at PRI, maybe it was 2019 or thereabouts, I think, and the internet will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were either at or right about the fastest four-cylinder in the world. Obviously, times change pretty quickly, but you're still kind of at least in the top 10?
Yeah, I believe we're at number 7. Yeah, that year, I think we just secured it.
Yeah, that's right.
The world's fastest, and we held it for a few months, which was better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the thing with records. They're made to be broken. So that's the element of the competition. And, I don't even quite know where it is or who holds it at the moment. But, even if I say what it is, it's going to probably have moved by the time this comes out. So it's almost irrelevant. But, 2,000 horsepower. And I know off air before we were talking about this compound turbo, which we'll talk about in a moment, with Shane T's aims of 3,000 horsepower, which seems absolutely ludicrous. If it was anyone other than Shane T, I'd be calling bullshit. But, that guy just does what he says he's going to do. What's the power limit of the block, I should say, not the power limitation? Where do you sort of see it being capable of?
I mean, at 2,000 horsepower, we got the engines living quite well. I mean, we still have, I think, block number 5 that the Techno Toy still runs in rotation. So everything's holding up quite well. Our biggest consumable items, other than bearings, is probably rods. We keep a good close eye on the rods. Every event we go to, at least when we were racing, we would take the motors apart and look at them. Rods would probably last about 2 events before we would change them. What do I see? Actually, on the compound setup, when we ran that on the dyno, I think Shane got it up to 135 pounds of boost because that's what as high as the sensor would read. When we pulled that motor out, we did see a lot of distortion in the combustion chamber of the head. So I think probably the head casting is probably the next weakest link for that compound setup. He's wanting to push 200 pounds of boost to it. Like I said, I think the head casting is probably going to get the brunt of it.
I guess the next obvious solution there is a billet head.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Because, of course, you've got that. And with the factory head, you've got the water jacket around that combustion chamber. I don't know how thick the material is between the combustion chamber and the water jacket, but obviously that's got to be a limitation when the cylinder pressure starts continually climbing, correct?
Yeah, exactly. You can see the spark plug being that area in the combustion chamber getting pushed in. So it's definitely the casting and the combustion pressure just exceeding the capacity of the material.
Yeah, okay. 200 PSI, I mean, those are numbers that you don't throw around or hear mentioned too often, even in the world of import drag racing. But yeah, again, if anyone can do it, I'm sure it's you guys and Shane T. Let's just get a quick rundown on this compound setup, and we won't go too deep on this. For those who want to dive in a bit more and find out a bit more about it, there's a interview with Shane that we did at PRI 2019, which covers the concept in a lot more detail than we can do here, and we'll put a link to that video in the show notes. But where's the limitation on a single turbo setup, and why do we need to go to compounding?
Well, I mean, nowadays with turbo technology, I mean, single turbo can make 100 PSI. It seems to be no problem. I mean, I think compounds really kicked off back in the day, 20 years ago, when 30 PSI was the max a turbo can make. So in order to make 60, 80 PSI, you had to compound it to make the turbos live. But there's probably no need to compound an engine right now with the turbo technology. But if you got some crazy ideas like Shane does, then that just gives you an excuse to compound it, And if you're going to compound it, why use 2 turbos? Why don't you use 3 turbos? So he just keeps on stacking on the ridiculousness to this thing, and we're along for the ride, and we want to see what happens, So
Yeah. And the element comes down to, though, with a single turbo, yes, turbo technology has come a massive way, leaps and bounds, particularly since I was involved in drag racing. And I'd love to kind of have another crack at it with access to the turbos we've got today. But when you're dealing with a small capacity 2 litre or 2.2 litre 4-cylinder import engine, you don't have capacity on your side. So you've really got to make up for that by flowing more air with the compressor. And you sort of get into the situation that your pressure ratios get so high that the turbo, either the compressor you fall off the map, or the efficiency of that compressor, you're just pumping more heat into the engine essentially. So the idea with the compounding, at least as I understand it, I haven't been personally involved, is that you're sort of staging the turbos so each turbo, the primary and the secondary, even though you've got 3 in your case, are working kind of in the sweet spot of their efficiency. But the end result, because there's a multiplication factor, is you've got that boost pressure in the inlet manifold, which is what you need, 135 PSI, 200 PSI, or whatever that may be. There is, however, a huge amount of complexity that goes into one of these systems. And while it is a work of art, and I enjoy looking at it, I can only imagine that servicing the engine gains a layer of complexity, and then there's more things to go wrong. Plus, of course, there is more weight. You've got 3 turbochargers instead of 1 now. Does that sort of play into your sort of thought process and planning there?
Yeah, as being the crew chief of the race car and trying to come up with contingency plans if something goes bad, adding 2 extra turbos to it adds 2 extra more problems, and all the piping and the maintenance involved. And it's going to add a whole nother level of complexity to just the operation of the car. But I mean, we're down for the challenge and to see what it comes with, what the result comes to be. Our plan with the car is take our time to get it race ready. I mean, we're going to make a lot of testing laps with it. We're going to test it on the dyno, and we're going to try to break stuff, because that's the only way you're going to prove it out, is just try to break things. And then so when you go to the racetrack, you know what to expect.
Yeah, and I think there's an expectation from those who aren't involved at this level that you can just make something that's bulletproof and go and do laps. The reality is you're so far into uncharted territory that no one can tell you. You can't jump on the internet and figure out what's going to break in a Billet SR20 at 3,000 horsepower. You're the pioneer there. You're going to have to be the one to figure that out firsthand. So, as you say, testing is what's going to be essential there to dial it in. I mean, in terms of making these cars go faster, obviously the 2J teams are deep in the 5s now. Is it just the power that's been holding the car back? Or at some point you've got more power essentially than you can put to the track, so then you become traction limited? What's the deal there in your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we started building the Techno Toys S15, we built that car to go mid-7s, and it was supposed to get shipped back to Trinidad. And we ended up getting that car in the 620s. And for that car to go to 620s, I'm still surprised it went that fast, just because it wasn't built to do it. And it struggled to do it. And we got to do it consistently, which was I'm happy for. With this new setup, we needed a purposely built car for it. I mean, something that was designed to go mid-5s. And that's where we didn't have the capability of doing that. So we had a whole nother team build the car. And the consultant that was in charge of consulting and building the car was a guy that knew how to build 5-second cars. So that's what's needed to get these cars go fast, a complete understanding. And so far, the car's come along pretty good. It's beyond my knowledge. And when the car actually hits the racetrack, we're going to have a lot more people there to make sure that, the car does what it needs to do, because it's beyond my capabilities. I'm pretty much there to manage the team and to manage the power plant.
Yeah, it's sort of what I guess we're getting at here is the two things sort of go hand in hand, in terms of there's no point going and trying to put 3,000 horsepower into that old chassis that you had that was built to go mid-7s. It's just not going to be able to utilize that power efficiently. So then you go with a Pro Mod chassis that is actually designed to use that sort of power level or even more. Obviously, everything's going to work, but there's going to be some learning curve involved in making that all work out. Out of interest, how far away are we from seeing this car actually turn some laps?
Ooh, I would probably say at least a year. Yeah. We're going to take our time, and we've already taken 5 years to get the car to the point where it's at. COVID didn't help. No one's in a hurry. Everyone's in understanding, and the owners of the car are, you've met Mohammed. He's a good guy. the only thing he wants is to be successful, and he'll take as long as he needs to be successful. And it's working out. We got a good team together, and where it's at right now, it's the next big hurdle is get it to the dyno, get it running, and just see what happens. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of things going on under the hood of that car, and I know there's a lot of unforeseen problems that are going to happen, and we're prepared for them. So that's why we don't want to plan too far ahead and push ourselves and try to make World Cup finals this year. And it's like, it's not just, let's take it easy and let's do it right. And when we go to the racetrack, we're ready to kick ass. That's the plan.
Yeah, I don't think rushing a project at this level has ever worked out even one time for anyone. So, I mean, it's a difficult pill to swallow, watching those records sort of drop lower and the competition get more fierce. But at the same time, there's nothing to be gained in going and destroying expensive parts and finding out that you weren't quite as prepared as you thought you were.
Exactly. Yeah. Me 20 years ago, I'd be like, let's get the car to the track tomorrow and let's run it. And yeah, you've been there and done that and seen the results. And now you're like, let's take our time and do it right.
Yeah. I mean, it's always a bit of pill to swallow, but it's usually the right call. And there's always going to be more racing next year, next season. Just keeps on going.
Always. The racing will never end.
Yeah. All right, Mark, I want to respect your time here, and we'll move on to wrapping this up. We've got the same 3 questions we have for all of our guests, and the first of those is, what's next in the future for you and Mazworx?
Wow. Well, with the lack of SR20 parts, I would love to start casting SR20 blocks, casting SR20 heads, and get into manufacturing, not really manufacturing the castings, but maybe getting raw castings and machining them and put them in the market. Keep supporting the SR20 market. I mean, the SR20s are close to my heart. I've been working on them since the mid-90s when I was in Japan. And, we spent a lot of time and money, doing a lot of R&D on them and being in the market. I would like to see the SR20s keep on going and not die off like a lot of other platforms that lack support. I'm gonna support them till probably the day I die.
I think, as I mentioned right at the start of this, it's one of those iconic and one of the more popular JDM engines. So I think there's always going to be that demand, and unfortunately, we see this across all of the brands. Really, these cars from the 90s that we're all passionate about. The manufacturers don't really care anymore. It's 2023. At some point, I guess they have to stop supporting these older engines, but it doesn't really help us out. So I guess it makes a good opportunity for Mazworx, though.
Exactly. That's the idea. As soon as they stop making them, hey, that's where we step in and we'll start making them.
Yeah. I guess the other element that comes along with this is, as these cars continue to climb in value, people are more inclined to pour more money into building a fresh engine for them to keep them running.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of these guys that come to me, have a 30-year-old motor. And, maybe they burn a piston, or they just know it's old. They want to get refreshed, and they understand, when they come to us, they're going to get a quality product, and that's what we try to deliver.
Yep. Next question. Is there any advice you give to a younger version of yourself, or perhaps one of our listeners, to help reach where you've got to today in your career faster, or maybe avoid some potential pitfalls that you've come across along your way?
Wow. I've made a lot of mistakes. I mean, when you go into business, just understand it's going to be a learning curve. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, but just take those mistakes as a learning lesson and don't continue making them. I mean, improve yourself, improve your process, hire the right people, learn the things you need to learn. I mean, to be a business owner, you've got to be able to embrace all aspects of your business. Even though I'm not a social guy, I'm not a good salesman, I'm not a good marketing guy, I try to push myself to do it and not take away from my shop hours that I work out there. But you got to be ready for the good days and you got to be ready for the bad days, because it's going to be swells. It's just stick it out and just keep on going and have a good mindset and have faith that at the end you're going to come out, do your customers right, do your employees right. And it ends up working out in the end.
There's a couple of things that you mentioned there, and I've probably talked about this on episodes in the past, but I think there's that mentality that we want to avoid failure at all cost. And the reality is, I think we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. So I would say don't be afraid of failure, because you're absolutely going to have some failures. It's just about unavoidable. But the key, which you mentioned, is learning from those, adjusting your procedures, your processes, or whatever it may be, to stop repeating those same failures. When you make the same mistake twice, that's a problem. But I don't think failing is something we should stay away from. The other element that I think I just wanted to highlight is you've got a business that is multifaceted. There's a lot of moving parts to it. You came into it and started it up with a specific skill set, but as you sort of mentioned, you might not be a pro at sales or marketing, but you've got enough knowledge in each of the areas of your business. And I think why that's important, first of all, I think when we're starting, it is what it is, because most people don't have the ability to start a business and instantly hire 6 staff. You kind of the jack of all trades initially, but what it does is it allows you to understand what that particular position is, and that better helps you when it comes to employing for that position. And that's sort of what's happened with High Performance Academy. It started as myself and my business partner, Ben, and we did everything. And then now we've got to think about 14 people on staff, but we've been able to build that up because we know and understand what each of those areas actually requires. All right, last question for today. Mark, if people want to follow you and see what you're up to, how are they best to do so?
We got a Facebook page, Mazworx, Instagram, and our website, mazworx.com. That's probably our 3 biggest spots. And you can call us up. I answer the phones. I own the business. I answer the phones. I talk to the customers. And a lot of times they appreciate, talking to the guy who knows the most. And I like talking to the customers on the phone sometimes. Sometimes I'm out in the shop with my headset on, running a CNC machine. Customers call me, and it's a little loud in the background, but just, understand I'm out there working too.
All right, we'll put links to your social media and your website in the show notes to make it super easy for people to find. Look, great chat. Again, really selfish of me because I've just used the last hour and a half or so to basically download your brain to help our engine program. But, hopefully this has also been beneficial to the SR20 geeks out there who have been listening as well. Really interested in seeing how close to this 3,000 horsepower mark you guys get to, and obviously just as interested to see what that car actually lays down when it hits the strip. So we'll be waiting patiently, and maybe we'll need to revisit and have another chat once that car's actually hit the strip. But best of luck. Cannot wait to see what it can do.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tune In with Mark, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Paintballer41 for the United States, who has said, must listen. This podcast is full of great information, and so are their classes. I highly recommend giving this podcast a listen. Well, thanks for the kind words, and if you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now, remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.